Really excited for our next speaker and the next talk, a really unique challenge, a design challenge that Molly Lafferty, our next speaker, had to tackle. Molly is a product design manager at Webflow. She is from Brooklyn. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. As a remote manager, about a few weeks ago, Molly had to put together and design the first design team retreat experience for Webflow. The retreat was initially supposed to take place in New Orleans in early April, and we all know the reason of why that could not happen anymore. So instead of canceling it, Molly felt prepared to take on the challenge of designing a remote design offsite. So what were the wins? What were the unexpected challenges? And what were the tips out of it? Molly will be here to share them all with you in her talk. So let's welcome on our virtual stage, Molly Lafferty.
And there we go. Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. It's really thrilling to be here. It's a very different experience, but a really exciting experience because I'm in my cozy home, but I get to connect with people all over the world all week, and just a really exciting event. So a big shout out to the team that put this together, especially Preet and Chantel, for being so quick and so thoughtful in their organization. So this talk is a little bit different than most I give because as Preet mentioned, this event happened just a few weeks ago. And, as a designer, once I do anything, I'm like, okay, that went pretty well, but I learned so much and I just need to iterate on it. But I do not want to iterate on this. I'm really hoping that our next offsite is something that we can do in person. But given, the challenges that we're all facing in our working lives right now, I feel really grateful to have this opportunity to share just a little bit of what I learned through that experience and what my team learned through that experience. That hopefully will help other teams facing maybe the same exact challenge. You need to move your offsite to a remote event, or you're just looking to lead workshops with your team. So before I get into all of that, a little bit more of an intro. So I work at Webflow and I'm a product design manager there. If you aren't familiar with Webflow, just pretend I don't work there for a second, like just designer to designer. It's a super cool tool, so definitely check it out. And what we do is we enable people to build for the web, but without code, and instead in a highly visual interface. Now, Webflow has a very clear mission. It is a mission that drew me to the company, and that is to enable everyone to create for the web. But something else that drew me to Webflow is the fact that our mission is actually a dual mission. So we have this first part, enable everyone to create for the web. And then we have the second part, which is to lead fulfilling and impactful lives while we do it. So we call this our dual mission, and the care that we're putting into our products and into our customers, we're also giving to ourselves, to our company, and to our teammates. Now, I could go on for another half hour about the ways that that manifests itself for the company, but something that's really important that I want to point out is that actually we are 70% remote. So I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. There's a Webflow headquarters in San Francisco, but we have team members literally all over the world. And I'm a huge proponent of remote work. I think it's empowering. I think it's accessible. And I think it has the potential to be a really great equalizing force in our industry when it's applied correctly. Now, I wanted to bring up a little bit, sort of a sentiment that I wanted to share as somebody who works remotely normally, but it's just a realization of this time. And that is, it's just hard to work, period. I am very well set up for remote work. I have a lovely dedicated workspace. I have a comfortable chair. I have the right desk. I do not have children at home. And it is still very, very difficult. And if you're missing even just a very basic thing like a very comfortable place to sit, it's going to be even more difficult. So as somebody who really believes in remote work, I'm both very hopeful that companies are going to have to sort of reckon with the fact that this is a very viable way to work, and it's a way that people want to work and that companies want to work, but also the fact that we have a lot of factors right now. We all need to be showing ourselves a lot of grace in this time with how we're approaching work and how much we feel that we can work. And I actually haven't been working this way very long. I started remote last October. But something that's been really helpful for me that I wanted to share was just this almost kind of like my mantra, like the word that I hold on to that's really helped me hone in my approach to remote work. And that is this idea of intentionality. I really love the word intentional. It implies kind of like a care and a thoughtfulness and a purposefulness in what you're doing. And this is a big part of a healthy remote work culture. You have to be very intentional with your communication. You have to be really intentional with how you're receiving communication. If you read any remote work primers, one of the first things that you'll read is always assume good intention. You don't have things like body language, tone of voice, or context. You have to be really intentional to connect with your teammates and plan work. It really can color your perspective throughout your entire day. And I wanted to share this because it was something that was just useful for me whenever I'm feeling a little bit lost within this change from my co-located to my remote work. And also, it's probably going to be a word that you're going to hear me say at least 4 or 5 more times, because this is truly, the intention, play on words there, that I bring to the work that I do at Webflow. Now, to take it back to the topic at hand, offsites. A marker of a really healthy work environment is that you actually don't downplay the importance of face-to-face time. We know it's really, really important at Webflow. We have a yearly team retreat every year. This is from last year's in Mexico. In addition to this, you get to go to the headquarters in San Francisco during your first year with the company if you are a remote worker. And then we have smaller offsites and team meetings that are as needed. And we needed one for the design team because something really exciting happened in October of last year. Before that, product design and brand design actually existed under separate sort of umbrellas in our organization. And we have now officially come together as a formalized design org. And we really wanted to celebrate that. And as I mentioned, because we're a remote organization, I have the privilege of working with people all over the world. We are design teams spread across 11 cities and 4 countries. And we had a really great opportunity to bring everyone together. Now, when you're planning any type of event, no matter how large or small, in person, not in person, a really good place to start, first of all, is actually to read this book, The Art of Gathering by Frida Parker. But she really encapsulates where you should start with any event, which is think of what you want to be different because you gathered and work backward from that outcome. And I really like this framing. I think it's, sometimes we get a little too focused on words like goals and objectives and what are we going to accomplish. But this feels a little bit broader. Just think about what you want to be different, what's going to feel different. And for our team, we wanted that to be a deeper feeling of just connectedness, of comfort within the team, of just really developing relationships because we were a totally new team altogether. And so what I'm actually going to be sharing moving forward is more ideas around that, because that was our intention, more how we approach this offsite planning from the social aspect. Now, as pre-mentioned, we were supposed to be in New Orleans on April 7th, eating beignets, listening to live music, wandering the city, really developing those connections. And we had everything booked, flights, hotel, we were going. And, for reasons I don't have to explain, the plans change. And something that I really appreciate about the practice of design and about our work as designers is we're always ready for this, right? Whether it's a new piece of feedback, an unexpected user test result, plans change, we take it in stride, we always find the opportunity to move forward. So we still had the time blocked off and we wanted to use that and to leverage it. But we still had that same question, which is how do we achieve this outcome, but when we're together apart? All of our planning still needed to tie back to that outcome. And as I mentioned, that was really on deepening the social connections. So what I'm going to share for the rest of the talk, it's not the step-by-step guide of how to plan an offsite, though I did learn a lot, especially logistically when dealing with many, many time zones. If you have, any questions or thoughts on that, please definitely ping me on Twitter. I do have some to share there as well. But I really wanted to share at a high level 3 of the lessons learned throughout this process, and also sort of how we approach the planning of the social aspect of this, deepening the connection and bringing the team together. And so these lessons that I'll go into, first is talking about our tools and thinking about our tools a little bit differently. I'll talk about social activities and how you can think about structuring those based on your team's needs. And then I'll talk about this idea that was really something I didn't realize until after, which is about embracing the constraints. So lean into your tools. To put it simply, the physical environment shapes our behavior and our interactions. We're probably all feeling this very, very acutely right now because most of us have probably been in the same physical environment for going on 2 months. It's the reason why when you're planning a retreat or an offsite or a vacation, you're looking for really energizing or inspiring or just different places. It's why companies spend millions of dollars on offices, right? It's really deeply important. And the fact is, you don't have control over it. Everybody's in their own environment. And really in this time, what we've come to find is that our places are these now. Like these are the places that we go every day. We go to Zoom, we go to Meet, we go to Blue Jeans, whatever your team or your organization are doing. And something I want to point out about these tools is like functionality and like sophistication wise, like these are like the Microsoft Paint of video conferencing. We are still in the early stages of understanding what we really need this technology to do and how we want to evolve it. But I think that's just important to point out because there's a lot of frustration that we're experiencing, and I'm going to touch upon some of those frustration points. What I want to share is this idea that we have these tools, they might be a little bit limited, but how can we really push them? So this example is not particularly groundbreaking, but something that I did was a few days before the offsite, I downloaded a bunch of photos of New Orleans from Google Photos. I made a folder and I shared it with the team. And I said, hey, when we log on Monday morning, change your Zoom virtual background to one of these backgrounds so we feel like we're there. I neglected to get a screenshot when we did that, but I do have a screenshot from one of our breakout sessions. And, you know, did it meaningfully change our sense of place? Probably not, but it was still sort of like a moment and a little bit of a reframing and acknowledgement of where we weren't, but that we were still trying to come together in that way. And so I really want to push on this idea of thinking about our tools a little bit differently. So Figma, for example, if with Figma you were to just describe to somebody who's, you know, not maybe in tech in the same way that we are, what it is, you might say something like, oh, it's, you know, an app design tool or a UI design tool. But push what Figma is a little bit further. And if you really broaden that out, what Figma is at its core is it's a collaborative real-time creation tool. And that's so cool. Like that opens up so much possibility. You might have seen this going around Twitter. It was featured on Fast Company last week. Stay at Home Valley, which was created. This is a massive Figma doc. You can go look it up right now. You can dive in. I was in it yesterday. There was some like weird stuff happening in there last night. But this like big collaborative project to kind of bring together this community in this time. And so we just took this idea. We were on a big Zoom call together and we created like a Webflow world. And these are just some of the screenshots of different areas of that world that I brought together. I created Catville. And, you know, this was just a really fun exercise and you get these really fun artifacts that come out of it. And really what this is meant to do, and my intention of sharing it, is that this is just the seed of an idea of what Figma could be used for or what some of our tools could be used for. Going back to Zoom for a second, I've seen people do trivia games. So like you change your background to like a movie scene and have people vote. I've seen people doing like kind of virtual tours. So like put your vacation photos behind you, or, you know, we're designers, do like design tennis and make like really cool Zoom backgrounds. So just really lean into your tools. But you also need to know when to lean out of them. And an unfortunate reality check is that despite all the best intentions, it's going to be really hard to escape your daily work. So it's very different mentally, even for yourself, when you get on an airplane and you're in another place. You have that physical distance and you have that mental distance for work. And unfortunately, especially right now, most of us don't have that distance at all. So we use Slack in our day-to-day. And what we did was we asked the team, hey, sign out of Slack. You know, your teams know that you're going to be away. We're using this time. Just sign out. But we still needed a way to communicate. The Zoom chat is a little bit fleeting. It's not the best place. And something that we did instead was we set up a Discord server. Now, I actually wish we had leaned into this much, much more in hindsight. Something really interesting happened when we used it. I noticed that, first of all, people's usernames were different. Their avatars were different. And it just felt different. It really was almost like a different space. And I would encourage you to look at actually using unfamiliar tools as a way to kind of create that mental distance or kind of create that feeling of newness or novelty. Like, hey, we're in a different space and we have different objectives and we're interacting in a slightly different way from our day-to-day. Now, I'm going to take a brief break to acknowledge the importance of breaks. I'm going to grab my mug. You can grab yours too. Disney World 2015. Any event you plan, you're going to build in breaks, then look at your schedule and build in at least another hour. Zoom fatigue is very real. You can look it up on Twitter. There's actually a lot of really great articles kind of getting at the scientific basis behind why we're so exhausted by it. But it's especially important. It might be, you might be thinking, oh, we're not together, we can pack in more. No, give more breaks and lean on the side of more downtime than less, so that everybody can really come together and bring their energy to the event. So up next, I want to talk about this idea of intentionally structuring your social connections. This is really important in remote environments and important in any sort of virtual gathering. You cannot rely on serendipity. Something I noticed when I joined Webflow first was that every meeting, people were very intentional about asking, how are you? How's your pet? How did your cat? What did you do this weekend? Like very, kind of typical small talk things, but very intentionally trying to connect on a personal level before every single meeting. I realized when I worked in an office, all of those conversations were happening outside of meetings. So meetings were like times to get work done, but that's not true in a remote environment. Actually, that connection time happens during the meeting time too, and you need to really lean into that. Another thing that, to be super honest, if you would ask the Molly of a year ago and said, hey, how would you feel if you were starting every team meeting with an icebreaker? I might have been like, ooh. There's the people who love icebreakers and the people who are like, ooh. But every week we start our product design team meeting with a question of the session. And I love this. It's so ingrained into the way of working, into how we plan these meetings and how to run these meetings. And I really look forward to them. And I learn so much about the team every week, and they're really simple. But this is just how we come together at the start and how we build those relationships, because you can't rely on the serendipity. You really do have to be intentional about pulling some of this out of your team. Now, I want to share a way to think about how you can plan social activities for your teams, whether in a remote offsite situation or in just terms of general remote team building. So if we look at a hierarchy of types, where at the bottom we have activities that best suit new teams, and at the top, the activities that best fit those more close and tight-knit teams. At the bottom, we're really concerned with building the foundation, right? This is where your highly structured social activities come in. You have to be very prescriptive. This is like your very typical icebreakers, team building, and presentations, which I'll talk a little bit more about our approach to that. And all of this, the goal of this is to really kind of set the expectations of interactions. And really, honestly, you're trying to pull stuff out of people. People have different comfort levels of sharing in a new group. And you just want to set those expectations really clearly. And once you've seeded that group with some of that learning and some of that knowledge, then you can reinforce those connections. And so you can have a little bit less structure, but you might want to still curate them. So we did like small curated coffee chats of people who don't normally work together. And we based this idea off of this thing called Donuts. Donuts is a really great Slack extension. If you use Slack in your company or in your team, that will randomly match people up. At Webflow, we do it. It's every 2 weeks. It matches 3 people up for a half-hour chat. And that's a really great way to kind of program serendipity into your remote environment. And then once you have a team that kind of knows each other and has started to really feel more comfortable sharing, you can really nurture those ties. And this is where activities that are a little bit more team-led or free-form in nature come in. So we didn't do all of these, but we did some of them, things like DJ and draw, so play music and just draw together, or stream a design documentary together, or go play Animal Crossing. But really lean into your team to lead these activities. It's really important that people kind of gravitate where they want and really develop those closer ties that are going to make them feel really safe and really enhance that sense of belonging on a team. Now, the following slide, I actually just added in because I came across this tweet, and I really just wanted to share this because it was a really great articulation of something I'd been feeling. And I think many people might be feeling this too. So Aaron Lewis, who's a writer and used to be a designer, tweeted this, I think just last week. He described social skeuomorphism, that feeling when you copy paste in real life social activities into a digital context without making any alterations. Think about digital dinner dates, movie nights, etc. Often makes you feel more distant by highlighting all the subtle differences between the virtual and the physical. Now, I don't have an antidote to this, but it put a name to something that I had been feeling in my personal life and a little bit in professional life too. There's a lot of teams who are doing, happy hours and those sorts of activities. And why are those feeling particularly exhausting? So as I said, I don't have the antidote, but it's important to keep this in mind when you're planning some of these social activities, I think both for your friends and also for yourself. Or sorry, for your coworkers and also for yourself and your friends. So going back to this hierarchy. So as I mentioned, the design team as a big team was actually new. We had product design that had a level of closeness, brand design that was close. We wanted to bring them together, and we still needed to build this foundation. And a good way to do that is through structured presentations, but that can feel really, really intimidating. What we ended up doing was the Pecha Kucha format. So if you aren't familiar with this format, it is fantastic. I've done it at a number of events that I've run in the past, and the format is pretty simple. You get 20 slides, 20 seconds a slide, but the kicker is that the slides auto advance. So the good news for people who don't love to give presentations, it's gonna be done. You're definitely gonna finish. And it keeps you on your toes a little bit, and it just provides some nice structure. Now, 20 slides, just free form, feels a little bit paralyzing. We wanted to give a bit more structure. So we did that by saying, hey, give us 5 slides about you, 5 slides about your work, and 10 slides about your interests. And you can really interpret that however you want. We had people who told more of a story, all the way to people who shared, 1 slide for one of their 10 out of 100 interests. And this was by and far everybody's favorite part of the offsite. We learned so much about each other, from people's art practice to their food travel diaries, to their hobbies and love of Bon Appetit Test Kitchen. I really love the wonton making walkthrough that we got, and it was just really fantastic. And people really rose up to that structure that we provided them. We're designers, we know constraints equal creativity, and that was definitely at play here. And you're just fun stuff is gonna be shared. You're gonna see cute baby photos maybe of your team, or embarrassing teenage photos. And yeah, it was just a really great structure, and I think could provide a good basis. I would love to see other teams sort of build on this idea of leveraging the Pecha Kucha format. And so to finish up, I just want to talk a little bit about embracing constraints. And this was the one that really didn't become clear to me until after the offsite. So because of where we started, we were so excited to be in person together, to stay at this hotel and eat all these wonderful meals, that my personal framing was, okay, well, we can't do that. It's not going to be as good as that. But how can we make it half as good? And I just wasn't really thinking from a more positive angle. So to illustrate this, something that we wanted to do in person was this thing we were calling a team tapestry exercise. We were really interested in weaving together the past, present, and future of design at Webflow. So we have designers who've been with the team or been with the company for almost 5 years, all the way to just a few months. And how do we really create a story together and create sort of a common understanding and viewpoint? And to be super honest, we hadn't actually figured out how this might work in an in-person context. We had not finished that part of the planning. So when we switched to the remote version of this, Ryan, who runs the brand design team, came up with this absolutely ingenious way to do it. So he created a Figma file that had these squares that build out from each other. And so at the center, it was the first year that Webflow was really formalized as a company. And then there was a square for every year out. And then the future was on the outside. And what we did is we got into a big Zoom call initially. We talked through what we were going to do. And the prompt was, we just fill it in with all of the designs and the moments and the photos and anything that we have from that year into that part of the Figma file. And then we also bounce people around into the breakout groups feature of Zoom. And this was just so great. Now, unfortunately, I'm sorry, it's small and blurred. This is, not something that was meant to be shared, but I want to sort of give you a sense of, you can use your imagination. There's tons of cursors flying around. Everybody is dumping in, features that they worked on, sketches they made, photos from other offsites. We even had little playing card templates. So people made little playing cards of themselves and put that on the canvas for the year that they joined. And at the very center, we had stuff like the very first Webflow logo sketch, which I don't think 90% of the team had ever seen before. And it was so great to do this. It was so great to do this at the same time, to go into those little breakout sessions. You can also use observation mode in Figma to kind of follow people around and chat about what you're seeing. And honestly, we couldn't have done this to this fidelity in person, right? We would have said, hey, laptop's down. We're not working in that way. But instead, we were able to co-create and tell a much richer story because we were remote. And so I'd really encourage you to take that point of framing. What are the things that you can do in a remote context you can't do in the other context? So another example, we did a really great coffee hour with some of the design team at Figma. We also brought in a guest speaker and did a Q&A. You can really increase the breadth of your event, because people are much more accessible in a sense. So really think about this with anything that you're planning, whether it is a bigger offsite experience or maybe just a workshop or even just a meeting. What do our remote experiences have to offer that the in-person ones do not? And just take a bit more of that opportunity mindset instead of like, well, it's not going to be as good. How do we get it half as good? And then to close, something that we did not do well, but we got very good feedback on. It's really important to embrace ceremony in really any event that you're doing, but especially in a remote event. You know, it's not a very big moment to just close your laptop screen and then walk into the kitchen, right? It's very different when, you know, an event ends and you fly home and you have a very clear beginning, middle, and ends. And we didn't do a good job at this at all. Part of it is our time zone constraints, but we definitely could have put a lot more thought into just wrapping up the event, really tying the thread together and embracing some aspects of ceremony. You know, I've even heard things with other types of gatherings where people are either lighting candles together or like, you know, sprinkling cinnamon and smelling it at the same time. Like, what are those sorts of more physical things that we can all do at the same time that just adds a little bit of that specialness? Maybe there's something that's really specific to the culture of your team or your company that you can leverage here. Okay, so to recap, talk about embrace constraints. If you want, take a screenshot of this, just a little bit of the cheat sheet of some of the things that I shared. And as I said, I really hope that this just sparks some interest, whether you're planning an offsite or just trying to plan other events for your team, that, you know, there's just some thought starters here or some tips or tricks or things you haven't thought of. And I would love to continue the conversation. As I said, this just happened 3 weeks ago. These are very new ideas for me. I would love to keep talking about them. Please go onto Twitter, use the hashtag, tell me what your team's been doing really well during this time, or things that you want to try, or things that haven't been working well. Let's definitely keep the conversation going there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Molly. That was amazing. A lot of learnings for us as well as we were planning remote design week. And I was like, oh, we should have done that. We should have done this. Some really amazing ideas there. So thank you so much for sharing them. And this definitely does not feel like just 3 weeks of work. So kudos to you and the team for putting together such an interactive programming. So thank you for that.